Very good morning. This is Business Live on this Tuesday with me, Darren McCaffrey. A major part of household energy bills is set to rise sharply from next year to help pay for maintaining energy security during the transition to green power. According to the industry regulator Ofgem, the push would increase network costs within household bills by £24 a year. These maintenance charges currently account for some 22% of the total bill. Let's bring in our business and economics correspondent, Paul Kelso. Paul, very good morning to you. We'll get on to the investment in a minute, but today is in many ways a good day, we should say, for some 21 million households in England who are going to save £11 a month.
Yeah, we haven't had many of those when it comes to energy bills, have we, in the last little while? This is the first fall in the price cap in a year, down 7%. So the way Ofgem present this is the average use for a typical household, which is essentially a family of four, just over £1,700, down 7% on the previous quarter. We can see it there. Look at the spike back in 22-23 in the aftermath of the Ukraine war. The government spent £40 billion subsidising household energy bills in that period. It's now fallen down there. The forecast actually, Darren, is that it will dip again under £1,700 on this measure in the final quarter of the year, October to December, when people might actually need their heating as opposed to this week. But the message we can talk about, I guess we'll talk about next, is that bills will rise as we move towards net zero and the clean power grid that is the government's ambition.
And that's the argument, isn't it, effectively from the regulator, is that they need to spend, companies need to spend money now to invest in order to bring down bills in the long term. I was listening to the regulator this morning talking about trying to move away from, and they've been talking about it for a while, the roller coaster rides of energy bills on the world market.
Yeah, and what Ofgem has announced today formally is approval for £24 billion of investment. Actually, the bulk of that's in the gas grid, £15 billion, around £10 billion in the electricity grid. But that will be the far bigger part of spending. Total spending on upgrading and expanding the electricity grid will be £80 billion. And that is largely, we have a huge amount of renewable energy, mainly offshore wind capacity being built, but it currently just can't be got to the customers who need it because the grid isn't big enough. So thousands of miles of high voltage cables, pylons, undersea, underground being constructed. And that will not only connect us to that renewable energy, but will enable us to enjoy the hopefully cheaper, certainly more stable prices, because at the moment not only do we rely on gas-fired power stations to underpin the grid. I mean, right now today about 30% of our power is coming from gas, and it's because it can be switched on and off, unlike renewables. It's the last electron into the system, so it sets the price. The aim is that by expanding the grid and allowing the renewable power onto the grid, it'll be renewables that set the price more often than gas, and that will mean there will be a more reliable price. They're still set by essentially subsidy deals. There are guarantees in the contracts with government that these renewable providers have. So there'll be a price below which they won't fall, but it will be much more stable. Now, Ed Miliband, of course, has promised, and Labour promised in its election manifesto, bills would come down by £300 as a result of this. Given that these upgrades to the grid are going to add £100 before any savings are made, those promises are, let's call them contested at best. But the move towards a more stable market, a renewables led system, is going to take investment up front, and ultimately the cost of a clean grid, the cost of net zero, is going to be paid by consumers today.
OK, Paul, as always, thank you very much indeed for that, Paul Kelso there. And we're going to get more on energy in a moment, but just want to bring you some news from Bristol Crown Court. In the last couple of minutes, we're hearing from Bristol Crown Court that Ryland Headedley, 92, has been told he will die in prison after he's been sentenced to a minimum life term of 20 years for the rape and murder of Louisa Dunn back in 1967, in what is thought to be actually Britain's oldest solved cold case. He was convicted yesterday at Bristol Crown Court of killing 75-year-old mother of two in what is thought, as I say, to be the longest running cold case in this country. And we're hearing, effectively, given the fact that he's 92 and he's going to serve at least a minimum term of 20 years, that Ryland Headedley will die in prison. So that news just emerging in the last couple of minutes. OK, let's return now to energy and speak to Joe McDonald, Chief Executive of 10 Energy. Joe, very good morning to you. First of all, what do you make of Ofgem's announcement today about this increased expenditure when it comes to investments? I mean, it's not necessarily good news for consumers because we're going to have to bear some of that cost, but I assume it's welcome news from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think it's never necessarily easy when you've had certainly rises in energy prices and bills for businesses and households over the last few years. I think the important thing is the distinction here of the reason that the bills are going to rise. So previously, it's been due to wholesale market volatility, wars on the other side of the world, driving why a business or a home has to pay more for energy here. And that's because, as it was mentioned, we rely on importing commodities and the gas price to set the electricity price in the UK. Now, yes, this is a cost that's going to increase in the short term, but the idea is actually around the ability to actually build more reliable and cheaper electricity in the grid for the transition that will be happening over the next few years. In its most simple terms, it's like the roads that the energy flows on, right? We need to upgrade the potholes, we need to widen the lanes, we need to build more roads. All of that's necessary in order to build more electricity generation and get it more efficiently around the UK to ultimately, in theory, mean we pay a lot lower bills in the future and we can start decoupling ourselves away from the foreign commodities like the oil and gas prices that currently affect the prices today for the majority of your electricity bill.
Yeah, and there's also, aside from that, as well, an argument, from many companies suggesting that we also need to look at potentially having a divergence in prices in different parts of the country. There are different parts of the country that have to deal with a lot more of the infrastructure of our energy production, don't they, than others?
Yeah, so I think that the ultimate problem is we rely on a wholesale market that has its price set by effectively the highest cost commodity. And if we rely on a fossil fuel driven wholesale market where prices are set by what it costs us to import gas and power the UK through that means we're always going to end up with quite volatile, quite high prices. Now, whether it's the right idea to basically make that more complex and keep the wholesale market, but create these kind of like postal code pricing, I think there's a lot of debate around that. The way it's implemented, I think, would really matter in terms of whether those cost savings would actually get to users. Our view is that there's a lot of transparency issues and hidden fees already existing in the wholesale market that needs much more reform before we add more complexity about how we locate zonal-based pricing. Ultimately, this is a national problem where the government should be incentivizing where to spend and what infrastructure we need in order to allow us to become an actual superpower when it comes to electricity production.
OK, and just very finally, Joe, one of the things that's included in the price cap that I think many people at home won't be aware of is debt. Takes into account the fact that a lot of people can't afford their energy bills, and it means that people who are paying for it are in part subsidising, aren't they, people who've fallen into debt energy. Do you think that is fair for effectively people who do pay their monthly bills having to support those that don't?
I think it's becoming clear that having access to cheap electricity as a nation is going to be the sort of thing that derives the new world order. And I think, India, China, the US know that. And we have to put a lot of effort into ensuring everyone gets fair access to cheaper electricity. And in a way, I think moving it away from a commodity to be traded and to be profited on by certain intermediaries and middlemen, actually working on ensuring it's fair for all. And if that means sharing that cost across those that can afford it and those that can't, I think we shift away from a commodity to actually a human right. The access to electricity and cheap electricity is fundamental to live and survive and thrive here in the UK. So I actually welcome anything that allows that fairness distribution to be encouraged by both the government and then companies and private companies that are working in order to build this modern energy grid for a modern world that we're living in.
OK, Joe, really appreciate your time this morning. Joe McDonald there. Thank you. And you can get more on this and how it's going to affect you and the potential changes coming ahead on our Money Vlog all you need to do is scan the QR code that's on your screen right now, and that'll take you through to the Sky News app. Now, the Chancellor is expected to announce plans to cut the annual tax-free cash ISA allowance in her Mansion House speech next month. That's in an effort to shift some of the £300 billion that British savers keep in cash and try and transfer it into British companies. The news comes as policymakers has just concluded an inquiry into the controversial lifetime ISA scheme that was set up in 2017. Well, we can speak to Brian Burns, who's head of personal finance at Moneybox, the asset manager with the most lifetime ISA savings under management. A very good morning to you, Brian. I mean, in many ways, what the Chancellor is trying to do kind of makes logical sense a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does absolutely make logical sense. The reason that they're giving for making potential adjustments to the amount that you can save in a cash ISA, and it is worth noting that this is still just speculation at the moment, the reason that they're giving is to encourage more people to investing, which is something that we absolutely support. As a country, we need to get more confident using investing accounts to save towards long-term goals. Personally, I just don't think that cutting the cash ISA limit is the way to do that. The reason that people don't invest in the UK is very, very personal, and it's a multitude of reasons. And these kind of quick fix policies or changes to the allowances, in my view, potentially won't work. And actually what we should be doing is building a coherent amount of policies that all adding together will make people more confident to invest over the longer term.
Is this the argument, and I've heard it many times before, that effectively we're not a nation that is used to investing in the stock market, we're more comfortable with cash, and yet that is an argument, but isn't the better argument actually trying to change people's minds on that, if in the long term investing in the stock market or indeed in other things is going to bring a greater return rather than just cash?
Yeah, and I think that's a point that's overlooked in this conversation. We should be celebrating the fact that we are a nation of extremely good savers. Savers should be encouraged and told that they've done the hard part in building together savings pots, and now we just need to make them more confident to move over to investing over time. We're often compared to the US, for example, which has a much stronger retail investing culture, but that has not sprung up overnight, and also closing that gap between the UK investing culture and the US investing culture also won't be closed overnight. As I say, it will take a coherent set of policies delivered over the course of the next 3 or 4 years between industry, between government and between the regulators. And the good news is that a lot of these policies are already in train. So just yesterday, we had the FCA's advice guidance boundary review, which will make it much easier for providers like Moneybox over the coming years to help people and make them feel more confident about choosing investing accounts if that is the right thing for them to do.
And just finally, Brian, talk to me about lifetime individual savings accounts, because there are concerns, people might have to withdraw their money for, unforeseen circumstances, whatever, and they may well in the end actually losing more money than they put in.
So the Lifetime ISA was introduced in 2017. Since then, about 3 million people have used the Lifetime ISA. They've developed incredibly good saving and investing habits. And it's also facilitated 250,000 first-time buyers to get onto the property ladder sooner than they otherwise would have. You are right that if you need your money for an emergency, which isn't purchasing your first home or saving for your retirement, you do lose some of your own money. We have been campaigning on that for a couple of years, and we think that reducing the withdrawal penalty from 25% to 20%, so you just lose the government bonus and not any of your own money, is a fair way to encourage people to use the Lifetime ISA for their longer term savings goals, but not punishing them if they do have an emergency along the way.
OK, Brian, we really appreciate your time this morning. That's Brian Burns there from Moneybox. Thank you very much indeed. Just a little bit more breaking news coming into us here at Sky News, and this involves Marks and Spencer. We're hearing from the CEO that the other half of their online services will open in a month, that by most of August, so next month, the impact of the cyber attack will be behind us. That's what he is saying today. Standard delivery is going to be available, or has been available, over the last couple of weeks after it was restored following that cyber attack in the early spring. But other services like Click and Collect, Next Day and Nominated Day delivery and international delivery, as well as deliveries to Northern Ireland, have not been available. Well, we're hearing from M&S, from the CEO, that will be fully restored, essentially, from next month, from August. It's been a big problem for Marks and Spencer. That meant they effectively had to withdraw the deliveries in many ways and their click and collect services at a time in which the company was doing incredibly well. But they have now, it seems, kind of got things back in order, and that full services will be restored from next month. That's according to the M&S CEO. Now, let's have a look at how the markets are doing. We're going to bring in Janet Mooy, Head of Market Analyst at RBC Brewin Dolphin. Very good morning to you, Janet. Can we start with the Eurozone? Today, we've got news around inflation, haven't we?
Yes, hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. Yes, Eurozone inflation has actually picked up a little bit from 1.9% to 2%, which is banging in line with the European Central Bank's inflation target. And the core inflation, underlying inflation trends, excluding goods and energy and food, actually is 2.3%. So basically, we're at a pretty benign inflation environment. And so I think that the ECB is probably likely to be very near the end of its rate cutting cycle, as it has previously signaled.
And this is kind of fascinating because, you know, it is, when you look at it, different parts of the world struggling yet again with kind of inflation, and that's having an impact on where potentially interest rates might go and indeed on currencies.
Yes. So basically, the euro has strengthened very strongly against the dollar this year, over 10%. But most of that is actually due to a weaker US dollar. And I think that's more to do with the fact that investors are trying to diversify their currency exposure from the US to other regions. And euro is obviously a very popular destination. And some of that may have to do with interest rate, but obviously the euro area has already seen a lot of rate cuts. So on a relative basis, the US now is expected actually to potentially deliver more rate cuts in 2026. So I think, relatively speaking, the dollar may weaken because of that. And of course, right now, the geopolitical tensions and the trade tensions have sort of subsided. So the demand for safe haven, like the US dollar, has also fallen.
Okay.
So I think, yes, so that's all the relative talks on interest rate and currency.
Back home, can we talk about house prices? Because they've seen a quite a significant drop. I think the sharpest drop in a couple of years.
Yeah, in terms of house prices today, we got the UK nationwide home prices. And on a month-on-month basis, in June, it dropped by 0.8%, which is the biggest fall since 2023. And year-on-year basis, UK house prices are rising at 2.1%. Overall speaking, I think the reason why over month there has been a contraction is because there has been higher stamp duty since April, and buyers are adjusting because of that. But I think over the second half of the year, because of the expectation of interest rate cuts, because of the actually, if you look at the 2-year and 5-year mixed fixed mortgages, they have been coming down and about a 3-year low, actually. So there are still some support for the UK housing market going forward. But I think there are concerns that the job market is now cooling a little bit. So I think the balance is, I think, about neutral.
OK, Janet, we really appreciate your time, as always, and your insight. Thank you very much indeed. Janet Mooy there from RBC Brewin Dolphin. Thank you. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up next, could these things, these robots, be the solution to Britain's labour shortage? We'll be speaking to the company that's built this rather cheeky, if slightly disconcerting chap, in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On-Board Lounge. Flying units, fly better. Thank you.
Very welcome back to Business Live. Now, from construction to hospitality to agriculture, labour shortages have affected many of Britain's industry. However, one company may have the answer: humanoid robots. That company is Hexagon and has unveiled its new robot, Eon. It's capable of working in industrial sectors such as automotive, aerospace, transportation, manufacturing, warehousing, and logistics. So could these droids be the solution to Britain's labour shortage? Well, let's speak to the president of Hexagon's robotics division. That's Oroid. Robert even. You're not a robot, not yet. Oroid, I suppose my first question is, just give us a sense of what you do, how you build these robots.
Sure. So Aeon is a humanoid robot, right, capable of completing various tasks autonomously and in industrial environments, as you mentioned. So the way you go about it is there's many design decisions from the locomotion, the feet versus wheels. We decided to have wheels. There's the training aspect. You need to train those robots to complete those tasks in various contexts. And of course, given the heritage of Hexagon and precision measurement, we have equipped the Aeon with a very vast sensor suite so that it can actually capture the environment, decide what to do in the environment, and how to complete the task optimally in that environment. So it's quite a complicated and complex piece of work, but very happy to have launched it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly impressive in many ways. And how much has it come on in recent years? And you know, clearly, yes, it is versatile and can move around, but it's got a long way to kind of being like us, if you like.
Yes, I think there's a few things, right? If you look at just a few years ago, humans were not at all where they are today. That's true of the entire market. And I think two aspects really motivated that fast transition. One is just improvement in robotics itself. So we were seeing motors and actuators being way more performant. But frankly, the breakthrough has been in AI. So we're all familiar with the ChatGPT moment, if you want. Well, the robots are having that same moment in terms of physical AI. So these are models that we can train the robot on and basically can have an understanding of the environment, better understanding the tasks, and frankly, more importantly, know how to do the task. So robotics and AI, massive advancements in the last 2 years that have seen some step functions in the way these robots can operate.
So that's the technology. Let's talk about kind of where we are in terms of the real world usage, if you like. Where are we seeing effectively kind of these robots starting to actually do stuff?
Yes, so we announced 2 pilots with Schaffer and Pilatus back in 2 weeks ago. And so what you will see in those environments is we're really testing the robot in the real world, right? Which is, of course, very important. We have multiple use cases that we're going after. One is what's called usually manipulation, so picking and placing, sorting parts, etc. The other one is machine tending, where you feed a part to a machine. Think of a plate of metal, a sheet of metal going through a factory. We can have inspection, so the robot with all its sensors can actually look at the environment and detect defects, for example, for preventive maintenance, or inspect parts for quality purposes. And can do also scanning of doors that we showed, etc. So there's quite a bit of use cases around. And what we're seeing, frankly, for us at Hexagon is the next 6 months, it's pilots in multiple customers to ensure that the robot does what it's supposed to do in that environment, in the real world, effectively.
Yeah, and Oro, just finally, just because we're watching this, and there'll be a lot of people going, oh, that's going to take my job in a couple of years' time.
Yes, I think it's a question that we get often. The way we've built out Aon and truly believe is that if you look at labor shortage and aging population, and we've talked to many industry leaders and they're facing those two variants quite heavily, we see Aon as a complement to the workforce. Then there are other aspects, which is Aon can take on a lot of the repetitive, labor-intensive tasks, but also tasks that have safety concerns. And then that allows people to really focus on higher value work. So with Pilatus is a good example of, we want the floor engineers to really focus on solutioning versus picking and sorting parts, for example. So we truly see it as a complement to the workforce. And again, addressing two very real challenges around labor shortage and aging population.
OK, it is daunting, exciting, terrifying in some ways too. All of those and more. Arno, Robert, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
OK, that's it from me on Business Live for the moment. We're going to be back, of course, at the usual time of 4:30 this afternoon. Do join me then if you can. Up next, it's the rest of the day's news, including that breaking news around Lucy Letby. Stay tuned for that, and I'll see you a little later on. Goodbye.